Okie dokie, it has stopped raining, so I'm back in my room. It is also creeping up to 2 a.m. How did that happen? I don't know. But yeah, so finishing up this particular series, I think, for tonight. I've got 2 more left to go, and then I'm caught up. What? That's amazing. So yes, and I'm all excitement and joy, and then I'm talking about the subject of our video games to blame, which is not a cheery subject. And it is a complicated subject, but most people who have done any research into it or have any experience playing video games have the consensus that they are not to blame. And generally speaking, my opinion on it is that video games are an art form, and like any art form, they reflect society. They don't necessarily enforce their opinion on society. And by that I mean, like, for example, at work we have pitch gallery, and when I go to any place, I visit picture galleries, and whenever you see classic works of art, particularly a lot of the time religious art, they show graphic acts of violence. There was one of the picture galleries we went to in Venice with my sister, had one which was like the something of the martyrs, and it had like visceral pictures of decapitations, and it was like genuinely gruesome and like obviously historical and obviously religious, but I found that genuinely unnerving. And because that form of violence can be shown historically, it's not considered a threat. Anyone can have access to that. There is violence on the news. There is violence, like, just I get that the argument is that you are experiencing an act of violence, which is true, but studies have shown that because you're experiencing it doesn't necessarily mean you want to go out and do it. And similarly, video games, for the most part, when we look at video games, the political angle in it is they're violent, blah 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 blah. But a lot of video games are not, and a lot of them are very much, they can mentally help people. Like, there's a good number of video games like Journey, or the introspective video games, which actually help deal with a lot of the emotional things that are the more prevalent factors within someone's mentality that could cause them to commit violence. And that's not to say that they are not entirely to blame. If someone is already emotionally in that place, then that might contribute, but to say that they are the primary cause is very silly to me. But my perspective from someone who lives in England, so we don't have, like, there is a lot of anti-gun laws in the UK. The only people I know who own guns are farmers, and they have to have very, very strict licensing, including how they lock it away, what they use it for. Purchasing bullets are pretty dang restrictive as far as I know, and you have to have very specific licensing and reasoning for having these weapons. And the farmers mostly use it's like low caliber things for shooting foxes who are attacking their chickens and that sort of thing. I don't know anyone who hunts for sport, especially since the hunting ban in the UK, which must be coming up to 10 years ago, maybe even later. Like, I don't know anyone who has that sort of thing. When I see a police officer with a gun, I find it genuinely unusual and rare, and so I don't know how much we can say that gun violence can be attributed to video games when in the UK, video games are very, very prevalent. Guns are not, and we do not have as many school shootings or mass shootings as other countries. That's not to say by any means that we are completely free of them, but the classic example I go to is Australia, where they have very, very low gun crime ever since they banned guns. And again, this is a debate about video games, not about guns, but I think the discussion does go hand in hand. And I know that's very controversial, and I'm looking forward to the dislikes on this video, but that's just my personal opinion on it. And to say that anyone who does already have an emotional or a psychological prerequisite towards violence may be interested in playing video games that are violent, and then going out to commit acts of violence, but I think that's more reflective on the individual than on their activities. In terms of what art can do to represent violence, that was around long before video games. Things like paintballing or hunting, you know, they've been around for a very long time, much, much longer than video games. Like access to weaponry is a big thing, but equally you can go out with a carving knife to attack people if you are that way inclined. So it's not all about guns, and equally it's definitely not all about video games. I'm trying to think of anything more that I can add to the conversation, honestly. I find it very silly that the media focuses a lot more on they played violent video games when, like, I've played Mass Effect where I played Renegade, I've gone around slapping journalists. It does not mean by any means that I want to go out and slap a journalist. I just really enjoy that kind of cathartic feeling occasionally of being like, oh, it's a bit naughty. Like, I played, like, as a child, I played Nightmare 3D, which includes shooting things. Like, one of the enemies is a mad professor who is basically human, but you shoot him. Like, that doesn't mean that I like guns. I've never touched a gun. I never want to touch a gun ever. I don't feel comfortable around them. I've only seen them maybe once or twice in my life, like at airports or like armed police. And like there was recently a very big event at work involving primarily police officers. There was many police officers, and like a few of them were armed, and they had to do things like bomb sweeping beforehand, and we all had to have our IDs on us for the day in order to get access to work because there was many police officers there. And like that was really unnerving, like that sort of level of security, and the fact that we live in this world where, you know, you have to live in that kind of state of mind of fear. That's terrifying to me, and I think that's more telling of society than it is of the art of that society. And I think art, as I said, art is reflective of society. It doesn't necessarily have an impact on society. There's very few things, like very few individual aspects of art that will affect society specifically. It's more when it becomes a trend. So for example, video games as a entity do affect society, like movies as an entity affect society, but an individual movie is unlikely to have an impact on an individual. So yeah, I don't know. I don't know what I'm saying at this point. It's 2 a.m. I'm gonna go to bed. It's a very, very complicated subject, and it deserves someone who has more gaming experience and more research to discuss this openly. But my personal opinion is that I would look more at the causes, the psychological causes behind the person who is justifying that act, the access to the weaponry, and before I would look at the art that they consume. But there we go. I'm going to go to bed. Night night.